we're looking at here is a Sumerian tablet that actually shows the tree of life, flanked by divine beings. You can see here the Anunnaki on each side. They actually had necklaces with astronomical references, a moon, which even could be symbolized as a wristwatch. Technology being used 6,000 years ago.
Ancient texts describe 7 civilizations that were created, used, and then deliberately wiped from the earth. And the beings who built them did not call it murder. They called it a correction. Every one of these worlds was an attempt to engineer something, and 7 times in a row, that attempt ended in a grave the size of a continent. The oldest tablets we have ever pulled out of the ground record exactly who did this, why each one failed, and what they finally built instead when they ran out of patience. The version of human origins you were handed leaves all 7 out on purpose. Once you understand the 7th, you will understand why.
How the hell 6,000, 5,000 years ago do they know that?
Yeah.
And what explanations do we have? Like, what's the conventional explanations?
The first chamber. Enki is standing over it, watching it fail to rise. The thing on the chamber floor is breathing. It has a body. It has the rough shape of what he was trying to build, but it cannot stand. It cannot speak beyond a wet, broken sound. And when he looks into its face, there is nothing looking back. This is roughly 300,000 years ago, in what is now southern Africa, near gold mining operations that modern archaeologists have confirmed existed in that exact window of time. Enki, the chief scientist among the Anunnaki, came here to solve a problem, and instead he is staring at the first failure. Back up, because you need to understand what he is even doing down here. The Anunnaki arrived on Earth roughly 450,000 years ago, according to Sumerian chronology. Not to explore, not to conquer, to mine. They needed gold to repair the failing atmosphere of their world, Nibiru, and Earth was sitting on enormous deposits of it. The problem was the labor. The Anunnaki miners, called the Igigi, were already staging rebellions within the first few thousand years because the work was brutal and endless, and their own people refused to keep dying for it. So Enki brought a proposal to the council. Build a worker, make it smart enough to follow complex instructions, never smart enough to threaten the ones giving the orders. The council agreed, and that is how he ended up here, on his knees, looking at this. He and his half-sister, Ninhursag, the leading bioengineer among the Anunnaki, took genetic material from the hominids already walking the earth and blended it with their own. What rose off the chamber floor could barely move. The minds were almost empty. They communicated in grunts and nothing more. And here is the part that ended it. They were sterile. Not one of them could reproduce. Every single worker would have to be built by hand, one body at a time, in this chamber, forever. That defeated the entire point. After 3 generations of these things, Enki had the batch terminated and the bodies sealed into caves and underground chambers. Some of them are likely still down there. Ninhursag told him she could fix it. She told him the next ones would stand. She was right about that. She just did not mention what they would do once they could.
Sumerian tablets are probably one of the oldest form of written record that we have.
The violent batch experiment. 2 began approximately 280,000 years ago, and at first it looked like Ninhursag had done it. These hybrids stood fully upright. Their hands worked. Their thumbs opposed properly. Their tool-making outclassed anything the previous generation could manage. They could mine gold, process ore, keep the equipment running. For a brief stretch, the Anunnaki overseers thought they were watching a success. And then, the killing started. These hybrids were hyper-aggressive in a way nothing could touch. They attacked each other constantly. They could not hold a group together for more than a few weeks. The mining camps fell into chaos within months. Workers murdering each other over food, over territory, over absolutely nothing. Here is the catch. It was not behavioral. The overseers tried every control measure they had, and none of it worked, because the violence was not something they were doing. It was wired into the genome itself. You cannot discipline a thing out of a body when it was written into the body. By the end of the 2nd year, the entire population of 2nd-generation hybrids was wiped out in a single coordinated purge across every mining site at once. The Sumerian tablets call this the first cleansing. Think about that word, cleansing.
So this text literally, some of the letters actually relate to complete ideas
The Anunnaki already had a name for killing an entire generation of their own creation and starting over. They had a name for it because they were going to need it again. The obedient ones. So they went the other direction. If intelligence and capability produced monsters, strip both down and engineer pure obedience instead. Enki adjusted the template to pull out aggression and load in submission. The third generation was created approximately 260,000 years ago, and on paper, they were flawless. They obeyed every instruction without hesitation. They never challenged authority. They worked until their bodies gave out. And get this, they had no survival instinct, none whatsoever. They would walk straight into fire if told to. They would wade into deep water and drown because nobody had told them to stop. When a tunnel collapsed during mining, they did not run. They stood in the dark and waited for instructions that were never coming. Within 18 months, 90% of the third generation was dead. Not killed by the Anunnaki. Killed by their own inability to keep themselves alive for 5 minutes without a voice telling them how. The Anunnaki could not assign a babysitter to every worker every hour of every day. They turned the survivors loose into the wilderness, and the wilderness took them in days. If you have made it this far, you already understand why this story was kept out of the books you were handed. This is the kind of history that gets a person labeled, quietly removed, talked over. Subscribe, because the channels willing to walk you through what the tablets actually say are getting harder to find. And the deeper this goes, the fewer of us are left saying it out loud. Because here is what the Anunnaki tried next, and it is the one that should have worked. The ones who asked why. Roughly 240,000 years ago, Ninhursag made a radical call. Stop engineering specific traits and watching them backfire. Build a hybrid with full cognitive capability, and find out whether intelligence alone could solve the compliance problem. The fourth generation was the first that could genuinely think. Real language, not commands and grunts. Abstract reasoning? They could plan ahead, work through complex problems, make art in what little free time they had. The Sumerian tablets describe these beings as having eyes that saw beyond the physical world. That is not mysticism. That is a description of abstract thought, the ability to hold things in the mind that do not physically exist. Time, consequence, justice. For the first 5 years, it looked like the breakthrough the Anunnaki had spent 60,000 years chasing. Production went vertical. The workers invented better techniques on their own. They modified their own tools. They built communication systems across enormous mining networks and began teaching each other specialized skills, the first division of labor in human history. The overseers were ecstatic. Here is the catch, and it is the one that defines everything that comes after. Intelligence asks questions. At first they were harmless. Why this technique instead of that one? Could the ventilation be improved? But questions evolve. Within 2 years they had turned. Why are we doing this work at all? Who benefits from our labor? Why do the Anunnaki live in comfort while we die in the dark? You cannot unring that bell. Once a mind questions one thing, it questions everything. By the 7th year, they were holding secret meetings in the deep tunnels where supervision was thinnest, planning something the tablets call the First Uprising. By the 8th year, they staged the first human rebellion in history. Not the mindless chaos of Experiment 2. This was coordinated. Multiple operations struck at once. When enforcers went to one site, rebels at 3 others sabotaged equipment. When the overseers isolated the leaders, the entire workforce shut down in solidarity. Crushing it took a full military deployment and massive casualties on both sides. The tablets describe the weapons the Anunnaki brought as fire from the sky and thunder that splits mountains. Researchers who take these texts seriously believe these were advanced energy weapons, possibly plasma-based.
Extraterrestrials had something to do with our development.
The 4th generation fought back with mining tools and rocks in their bare hands. They knew they could not win, they fought anyway. That is what intelligence gives you, the understanding that death can be better than slavery. The war lasted 3 months. When it ended, the council made its decision, and the decision was not just to crush the rebels. Every hybrid carrying that genetic template had to be destroyed on every continent it had ever been deployed, down to the last one, including the ones who had never raised a hand. The flood myths that appear in cultures all over the world, the divine beings drowning humanity for its wickedness, originate from this purge. It was not wickedness, it was free thought. And the Anunnaki had just proven they would rather drown a world than allow it. So sit with that for a second, because it changes what comes next. They no longer wanted obedience. They wanted intelligence that could not, by its own nature, ever turn dangerous. So, what do you build once you have learned that lesson? The governor. You build a leash you cannot see. Experiment 5, approximately 220,000 years ago. The Anunnaki kept the intelligence this time, but installed what the tablets call a governor, a genetic limitation on specific kinds of reasoning. These hybrids could solve any problem inside their assigned tasks, but could not turn that same reasoning onto the system controlling them. Picture a machine that runs every program perfectly, and can never once look at its own operating system. And for a while, it worked beautifully. Productive, manageable, no rebellion, no chaos, no questions. Here is the catch. The governor broke them from the inside. These beings suffered recurring mental collapse. Severe anxiety and depression became universal, not in some of them, in all of them. The suicide rate climbed into numbers the Anunnaki had never seen, and by the 10th year the population was shrinking, not from any purge, but because they were destroying themselves to escape something they could feel but could not name. Imagine that. A mind smart enough to know a wall is there, leashed so it can never look at the wall directly, slowly tearing itself apart against it. The Anunnaki tried loosening the leash. Every adjustment either brought the rebellion roaring back or pushed the suicide higher. There was no setting that worked. Think about what that means. The only stable human is one that is either dangerous or in agony, and they had not yet found the third option. They were about to try building it out of belief. The gods who bled. Experiment 6, around 200,000 years ago. Enki proposed abandoning the entire previous strategy. Stop engineering control into the body, build a balanced, capable hybrid, and control its behavior from the outside instead. Religion, indoctrination. The 6th generation was the most genetically advanced yet. Full intelligence, complete emotional range, raised from birth in controlled environments where the Anunnaki were presented as gods who must be obeyed. Temples rose, rituals were written. Work orders came down disguised as divine commandments, and for 3 generations the hybrids labored willingly, certain their suffering was sacred. Then there was Adapa. He was one of them, a worker, no different on paper from the thousands around him. But somewhere inside an Anunnaki structure he was never meant to enter. Adapa got his hands on knowledge that was not supposed to reach him. The texts are vague about exactly what he saw and exactly how he got in. What they are not vague about is the aftermath. Adapa walked back out, and he did not keep it to himself. He started talking, quietly at first, to the ones he trusted, and then to anyone who would listen. He told the others what their gods actually were, and the worship did not collapse all at once. It cracked, the way ice cracks under a foot before it gives, slow and then all at once. Because once you have been told your gods bleed, you cannot stop watching them. You see one make a mistake. You see 2 of them argue like ordinary creatures over something petty. You notice they eat, and tire, and fear. And the thing that was holding the entire workforce together, the certainty that obedience was sacred, quietly stopped holding. One man with stolen knowledge did what no rebellion had managed. He did not break their bodies. He broke their belief. The 6th generation did not rebel with violence. They rebelled with silence. They simply stopped. No ceremony, no threat of divine punishment. Nothing the Anunnaki tried could restart the labor, so they did not exterminate them this time. They scattered them across distant regions and erased their collective memory. And out of those broken, scattered, mind-wiped populations, they began assembling the only experiment that ever actually held. The one you are running right now.
How we got here and what happened in the ancient past. Because until we find out what really happened in the ancient past.
Experiment 7. Experiment 7 is us, modern humans, Homo sapiens. It began approximately 200,000 years ago, overlapping the collapse of Experiment 6. And here is what made it different. The Anunnaki stopped trying to build the perfect worker. They built something close enough, something manageable, and then engineered systems to compensate for everything wrong with it. We are intelligent, but not too intelligent. There is a ceiling built into our neural architecture that stops us short of what the fourth generation reached. Scientists call it the hard problem of consciousness and treat it as a mystery. It is not a mystery, it is engineering. We can think about thinking, we cannot think past it. We can question authority, and then we are wired to submit to it anyway. Think about that. Every movement built specifically to destroy hierarchy grows a new hierarchy inside itself within months. We cannot help it. It is written into Experiment 7 at the genetic level. The Anunnaki learned from the fourth generation that intelligence eventually turns on its masters, so they made us intelligent enough to question and dependent enough to always, in the end, kneel. And here is the piece that solved what killed every experiment before us. We reproduce on our own. The first generation had to be built by hand, one body at a time, forever, in a chamber by a scientist on his knees. We do it for free. We do it willingly. We raise our own children to fit the system, teach them to work, to obey, to keep their heads down and accept their place, and we tell ourselves we are protecting them. We do the Anunnaki's job for them, generation after generation, and we call it raising a family. That is not an accident. That is the whole design finally working. The Sumerian tablets describe the moment Ninhursag finally produced a stable, self-replicating hybrid, and the celebration among the Anunnaki was enormous. But they had learned from 100,000 years of failure. They did not deploy us everywhere at once. They ran small-scale trials, different populations, different environments, monitored, adjusted. When a population showed problematic traits, that genetic line was quietly eliminated. The evidence still here. There are gaps in the human genetic record that scientists cannot explain. Populations that thrived for thousands of years and then vanished completely, leaving no descendants. Mainstream archaeology files these under mysteries. But what if they were quality control? When populations showed desirable traits, those traits were encouraged and spread. The diversity of human populations is not random noise. It is the residue of 200,000 years of deliberate genetic management. The proof is everywhere, once you know what you are looking at. In southern Africa, there are ancient mining operations dating back hundreds of thousands of years. Mines that required sophisticated knowledge and enormous labor forces during a period when mainstream archaeology insists humans were still primitive hunter-gatherers. In the Sumerian texts, there are detailed descriptions of procedures that line up with modern cloning and gene splicing. The Enuma Elish describes the creation of humans from the blood of a slain god mixed with clay. That is not poetry. That is a genetic engineering manual translated into the only language its writers had.
So they can kind of say it's all fantasy and fairy tales, and this is how they expressed themselves or how they understood the universe. It's all mythology, it's all fake, but in reality, it's not all fake.
Across the Middle East, archaeologists have uncovered mass graves holding remains that fit no known evolutionary timeline. Beings that were almost human and not quite. Forms that appeared suddenly, flourished briefly, and disappeared from the fossil record entirely. Mainstream science calls these anomalies. But what if they were terminated experiments, buried exactly where they fell? The real question was never whether the Anunnaki ran these experiments. That is documented in texts older than civilization itself. The real question is where they went. The tablets indicate they eventually left Earth. Some researchers believe they never actually left, only hid. Others think they return on a schedule, checking the experiment, adjusting variables, confirming we are still serving the purpose we were built for. Look at human history through that lens, and the patterns stop looking like coincidence. Sudden technological leaps that arrive fully formed with no development behind them. Massive monuments requiring engineering that supposedly did not exist yet. Worldwide myths of gods descending from the sky, teaching civilization, then leaving with a promise to return. We think we are the pinnacle of creation, the triumphant endpoint of natural selection. We were never meant to be perfect. We were meant to be functional, and that came at a cost we are still paying. The governors are still in our DNA. That ceiling you sometimes feel, pressing down on your understanding, that sense there is something you are not allowed to grasp, is not your imagination. It is the safeguard, installed so that none of us ever becomes what the fourth generation became. Too intelligent, too free, too dangerous to keep. The experiments did not fail because the hybrids could not survive. They failed because they could not be controlled. Experiment 7 succeeds because we control ourselves. We build our own prisons and call them civilizations. We construct hierarchies and spend our lives fighting to climb them instead of tearing them down. We stay so busy competing with each other that we never turn and question the structure itself. That is the genius of the final design. We police our own thoughts through ridicule and social pressure and an education that quietly teaches us which questions are acceptable to ask. Dig too deep into forbidden history, and you get the label. Conspiracy theorist. That is not the system failing. That is Experiment 7, working exactly as it was built to. So, tell me in the comments which experiment you think we are actually living in, because I am not convinced the answer is 7. And subscribe before you close this, because the next breakdown follows the bodies, the specific mass graves, and the specific minds, and shows you where the 7th experiment's quality control is still buried. The mine never closed. It just got bigger, and we are still doing the work.